We want to welcome you all to this discussion on how can we better welcome those who feel they don't fit. It's a really crucial question to consider at a time when members of all religious stripes are disaffiliating from organized religion in greater numbers. So grateful for your presence here in this session. I'm Amy Andrus. I am an associate director at the International Center for Law and Religion Studies, and I'm really excited about the panelists that we have today and to hear their insights. So the question is, so how do those who have chosen to stay welcome and make room on the pew for those who are considering leaving or who have left because they feel like they just don't fit? Again, we're really blessed to have Ben Schilaty and Barbara Morgan Gardner with us today. Barbara is a member of BYU's religious education faculty. Her research interests focus primarily on women in religious leadership, international education focused on Latin America, and religious pedagogy. She is the author of the book, The Priesthood Power of Women in the Temple, Church, and Family. And we're plugging a lot of books today, and I definitely plug Barbara's and Ben's. I've read them this past week, and very insightful. Ben joked that I had prop copies. They're not prop copies. They are well worn. Barbara received her PhD in instructional psychology and completed postdoctoral work at Harvard University. And in Boston, she served as institute director, which included an assignment as the chaplain at both Harvard and MIT. She continues to serve as chaplain at large in higher education for the Church of Jesus Christ. And Barbara and I have not met before today, but I feel like we have lived parallel lives in some strange ways. We both received our master's degree in kind of a niche subject in international educational development, and we were both bitterly disappointed when we were assigned to serve as young missionaries in the California, Los Angeles mission, Spanish-speaking, with an assignment in the visitor center. Is that true? It is true. But we both really, really came to deeply love and appreciate that assignment. Barbara and her husband, Dustin, are the parents of 2 children. So LAVC sisters forever, Barbara. I know.
Yes, wow.
I know. Dr. Ben.
I don't want to be left out, so I was also disappointed with your mission calls.
Ben went to the true mission of Spain, Madrid?
Chihuahua, Mexico.
Oh, Chihuahua, Mexico.
Close.
That's right. That's right.
And that is part of our mission. Chihuahua, Mexico was part of our mission.
It was, actually. Yeah. We taught a lot of people from Chihuahua. Yes, I can. Dr. Ben Schilaty works as an honor code administrator and adjunct professor at BYU. He holds 3 BYU degrees, a bachelor's degree in Latin American studies, a master's in Hispanic linguistics, and a master's in social work. And he also earned a PhD in second language acquisition and teaching from the University of Arizona. For 10 years, he truly did the Lord's work, teaching Spanish in middle school, high school, and college settings. And he co-hosts the podcast, Questions from the Closet. And Ben is the author of A Walk in My Shoes, Questions I'm Often Asked as a Gay Latter-day Saint. We'll hear first from Ben and then Barbara, but just a few final introductory notes here. We're mindful that most, but not all, attending this session are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as are Barbara and Ben. We would hope that those who are not of our faith can extrapolate some principles and practices to use in your faith communities and spheres of influence. If we slip into Latter-day Saint lingo and you're not quite sure of terms that are maybe unfamiliar to you, feel free to raise your hand for translation services or come up to us afterward and we'll explain. I think a quote from Ben's book serves as a really beautiful introduction to today's discussion. He writes, "The Lord defines Zion in part as a people of one heart and one mind. I don't think this means that we must all think and feel the same things, but that we strive to understand what is in one another's hearts and minds. In order to do this, we have to be vulnerable with each other. Openness builds trust, trust builds unity, and unity builds Zion. I believe that as we open up to one another, we can expand the borders of Zion and grow into the people that God would have us be." So we're really grateful that Ben and Barbara have both joined us today and have been willing to accept the invitation to open up their hearts and minds in this setting. So we'll turn the time again over to Ben first, and then Barbara to share their thoughts on the theme, and then I will introduce the question and answer portion of this session.
Hello, friends. It's so great to be with you today. I'm just going to lift up the mic because I'm so tall I don't want to have to hunch over the whole time, although I would be good at ringing bells in a cathedral. That was a hunchback joke. So, you might be wondering, why is Ben here? Why are we talking about people who don't fit? I'm a tall, white, English-speaking male with hair who is highly educated. I fit in as much as anyone could. But my orientation as a gay Latter-day Saint has made life difficult at times. And I'm really grateful for the things that leaders of my church have said and invited us to do to help people know they belong. So one of our church leaders, Russell Ballard, Apostle M. Russell Ballard said this at BYU 5 years ago in 2017, speaking to the whole campus community. He said, we need to listen to and understand what our LGBT brothers and sisters are feeling and experiencing. Certainly, we must do better than we've done in the past so that all members feel they have a spiritual home where their brothers and sisters love them and where they have a place to worship and serve the Lord. Now, I love that quote so much. Obviously, I memorized it. But I love his invitation to do two things, to listen and understand. Now, those are really big invitations, and listening and understanding can look different in our different spheres of influence. But I also appreciate that he acknowledged, certainly, we must do better than we've done in the past. We have to do a better job of listening and understanding people who have different experiences than us. So I first realized I was attracted to other guys when I was about 11 years old, but this was back in the 90s when I was a youth and a teen. And back then, you might remember what the 90s were like. It wasn't okay to be gay even in society. And I remember when the AIDS epidemic was still happening, and people saying things like, AIDS isn't the problem, it's the solution. And those were the waters I swam in, that being gay was bad and wrong and a choice, and God was punishing people who were gay. And so I thought, there's no way that I can be that. And so I thought, well, this is just a phase. This is something that will go away. And when I was 19 years old, I served a mission for the church in Chihuahua, Mexico for 2 years. And I thought, look, I got this problem. God will fix it as I serve him and dedicate my life to him. So I came home from my mission, and things had not changed. Things were the same. And I thought, well, what do I do now? And that started years of praying that God would change my orientation. And I'd been taught very explicitly that same-sex attraction was a trial, a temptation, and an affliction of this life that wouldn't exist in the next life. And as I tried harder and harder to change my orientation, I just started to wish that I could be dead, because I thought I would be better off being dead and straight than alive and gay. And I just wished that I could die. That started to change when I came out to my two best friends here at BYU. I came out to them in Kiwanis Park, just a few blocks that way. We were on a walk, and I'd wanted to tell someone about my orientation for a long time, but I was just too scared to do so. And this feeling would bubble up inside of me where I knew I just needed to share what was going on, but I was just so scared, I would just always push that away. So I was on a walk with my two best friends, and this feeling bubbled up inside of me that I needed to tell them. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that, but I just felt God prompt me and say, I orchestrated the situation so you could tell them. So I finally asked if we could sit down on the grass, and I hemmed and hawed for a few minutes, and I finally said, can we sit down? I want to tell you something. And then I finally said, for as long as I can remember, I've been more attracted to men than women. And that was the easiest way for me to say it at the time. And they both responded with love and kindness, but my friend Craig, who was there, who was my roommate, we shared a bedroom together, he wasn't saying a ton. He wasn't saying as much as my other friends. So I finally said, Craig, I understand if you don't want to be my roommate anymore. Putting into words this fear I'd had for months. And he responded by saying, why wouldn't I want to be your roommate? You're the same person you've always been. And that was the beginning of my healing, where I could just share what was going on in my life, and people loved me and accepted me and treated me the same. Now, throughout my 20s, that all happened when I was 23 years old, I thought that I was going to live a quote-unquote normal and traditional life. I was going to marry a woman, have a family, things were going to be normal. Then when I turned 30, I realized that things weren't going to be normal. My attractions weren't going to change. Marriage to a woman just wasn't going to be in the cards for me. And so I finally came out publicly on my blog, which was a very scary thing for me to do, because I'm the only Ben Schilaty on the internet, so I'm really Googleable. And but it led to so many good things, and just this weight of having to hide for so long was suddenly gone. And just 2 weeks after coming out on my blog, I knew a number of people at church had read it, but not everyone had. And I was teaching a Sunday school lesson. And I just felt suddenly this prompting to tell everyone that I was gay. And so I pivoted in the lesson and fit my orientation into the lesson and talked about how my orientation had taught me about divine love. And then I sat down, and weeks later, the bishop of my congregation, so the leader of my congregation, came up to me and said, Ben, I want to tell you what I saw that day when you came out to everyone at church. He said, when I sat down, I saw you exhale, and I saw this actual weight come off of you, because you didn't have to hide anymore. And he said, that is exactly the kind of healing I want to see happen in my congregation. And a few months later, I was in a congregation for young single adults, which is a weird thing that we do in our church. And then I was kicked out of that when I turned 31. So I started attending a local Spanish congregation. Now, the Spanish congregation was mostly immigrants from Mexico. This was in Tucson, Arizona. And they tend to be traditionally conservative and not the most LGBTQ friendly. And so I was scared to come out to this congregation. And while I was attending this congregation, in June of 2015, the Obergefell ruling happened, where same-sex marriage became the law of the land nationwide. And every congregation in the U.S. was going to have a lesson about this and how to respond to it. So I decided I didn't want to go to that lesson. I don't know what people are going to say, and I don't want to hear what they have to say. But I decided to go anyway at the last minute, and I walked into the Sunday school class where we were going to be talking about this, and I said a very fervent prayer. I said, God, I am not going to say anything, but if you want me to say something, you have to make it very obvious. And so in the middle of the class, my hand just went up in the air. And I said, we're talking about gay people like they're different from us Latter-day Saints. And I said, there are a lot of people who are gay and who are Latter-day Saints who want to worship in this church, and I am one of those people. And the bishop walked up to me right then and gave me a high five, and he said, you are my hero. And he said, my daughter is gay, and she doesn't want to come to church anymore. And he talked about how much he loved her and how he wished that she would feel welcomed. And the whole tone of the conversation shifted from gays versus Latter-day Saints to how are we going to make sure everyone feels welcome. And we have this hymn that we sing in our church called Families Can Be Together Forever. And we sang that hymn at the end of the meeting, and I felt so intensely that these people with a different native language from a different country were my family. Not an experience I expected to have that day. And a few years after that, I moved up here to Provo, Utah to start a master's in social work so I could become a therapist. And my 2 wards in Tucson had been so welcoming and kind to me, and I'd been warned that Provo wouldn't be as good to me as an openly gay Latter-day Saint. So I decided I wasn't going to come out when I moved here. So often when a member of the church moves to a new congregation, the bishop sets up a brief 5-minute get-to-know-you meeting. So I went to church on the first day, and then after church, I had a meeting with the bishop. And I'd never met him before, didn't know a thing about him. And so in this little 5-minute meeting, he asked me why I moved to Provo, and I decided I wasn't going to tell him I was gay. And I said, well, I moved here to start a master's in social work. And he said, well, what do you want to do with that? And I said, well, I want to work with LGBTQ Latter-day Saints and their families because I'm gay. And this is what he said in response. He said, what do I need to know and understand so I can serve you better? Now, in that moment, I knew that I'd found my place. I don't even remember what I said, but he offered me not only kindness, but curiosity. And he said, I don't have a lot of time right now, but I would love to take you to lunch so I can get to know you better and hear your story. He's paid for me to get lunch at least 24 times since then. His name is J.B. Haas. He works at BYU. He's absolutely amazing. I remember walking to my car after that meeting and getting into my car, and I literally shouted for joy because I knew I'd found a place where I could belong. Now, a few months later, we got a new bishop, and he was released. And my new bishop was great, but I'd felt like I could be open and honest and talk about my experiences. And so one day in a Sunday school class, I shared as part of a comment that I was a gay member of the church. And after that class, the teacher came up to me and he said, "You shouldn't be talking about your perversions at church." And I'm not making this story up. This happened in a building just a few blocks away from here. And then he talked at me for about 40 minutes about the inappropriateness of sharing that I was gay at church. Now, I pushed back a lot, and he just wasn't listening. He just wouldn't have it. And when our conversation was over, I walked down the hallway and I thought, I don't want to come back here next week. I don't want to come back here. And as I pushed the doors open, I just felt this intense feeling that said, forgive him. He doesn't know what he's doing. And so I did my best to forgive that person. And then for the next 6 months, I listened to him, and I didn't mention anything about my orientation at church because I was scared. And I was scared about what would happen and how people would respond if I shared the real lived experiences of my life. And then 6 months later, I was teaching a class, and I felt like I can't hide anymore. And as part of the lesson, I shared my orientation, and a new member of the ward of our congregation came up to me, who was also gay. And he said, thank you so much. I needed to hear that. I think I found the right place for me. So there's real power in sharing the realities of our lives, but there's also a real fear in doing it because people are scared of people like me. Now, in this country, we have legal protections for LGBTQ individuals. I'm not going to be fired for being gay. I'm not going to lose housing because I'm gay. But will I be able to talk about my experiences at church? Will I be able to share what's actually happening to me at church? And there's nothing the law can do to protect that, but there are things that people can do to make sure that I am loved and welcomed and can be me. And so the principle I want to give you is that principle I shared at the beginning, which was given by Elder M. Russell Ballard, that we need to listen to and understand what our LGBTQ brothers and sisters are feeling and experiencing. We need to offer kindness and curiosity so that people like me don't feel like we have to hide our lived experiences, but we can come as our full selves.
I'm actually going to go over to the podium because I'm going to use a couple of slides really quick. So
Wait, the mic comes off?
It does. You can dance all you want, Ben. You can dance all you want. You know, that's a principle of, oh, really? Look how kind.
I'll
Do
scoot.
you want to switch me, please?
Okay, we'll squish.
We're flexible.
It works. We got it.
Okay, I see if this thing works with this. So I've been traveling a little bit lately, and I've been studying somewhat of Joan of Arc. This is random. You are receiving this presentation based on my last moment of thinking and my last moment of traveling. Although, in reality, I have thought of and loved Joan of Arc for quite some time. But a couple of weeks ago, my husband and I went to the place that Joan of Arc was both raised, some of the battlefields that she was in, as well as this picture over here where she was placed before she was put into prison, before she was killed. And then also, we went to the place that she actually was burned at the stake, and just had some moments of reflecting on Joan of Arc. This is not meant to be an entire presentation on Joan of Arc by any means. That may be a presentation for another day. But I have learned to love Joan of Arc, and I think I love her because I think so many of us put ourselves in the position of Joan of Arc in one way or another. So Joan of Arc, I'll just give you a quick synopsis. She was born and raised in the 1400s in France, and she had received revelation and guidance as a woman that she was to help throne the next king of France. And she believed that this revelation did come from God. She said she heard voices, and when she heard these voices, she recognized the light, and she knew what she knew. And she says in her words, "I could not deny it." And so she goes on this mission. She takes off her normal clothes, puts on her pants, and goes forward doing exactly what she believed was an assignment from the Lord for her. Long story short, without getting into all the details, she was actually charged for blasphemy, with the recognition that women were not to receive revelation from God and speak in that manner. This is something that, of course, as a woman has become very important to me. She does end up being burned at the stake, and as she is dying, she asks that the priest will hold up the cross, this is the picture representing the cross that's there in France right now, so that she could look at the cross, and she recited scriptures out loud so that she could overpower the words and the sound of the fire and the flames. Her dying words were reported to be "Jesus, Jesus," as she dies. I have been impacted and have wept knowing that there is a young woman, and I believe that there are many young women today who are trying to find truth, who are trying to find voices, and not just young women, many people who are trying to receive revelation and move forward according to the guidance that they are receiving. About 20 years after, of course, they had another court case where they actually taught and sanctified Joan of Arc, and she has become a saint for the Catholic Church. This spot with the green around it is actually the spot where she was burned at the stake, and that cross is there surrounding it, and it is a very sacred place. And to me, it represents what it is for an individual, regardless of social, cultural, traditional norms in any way, doing what she knows is right and doing what he knows is right. I love the phrase, and an oft-quoted statement by Joseph Smith, but that I used as a chaplain when I was serving at Harvard when I had a Jewish rabbi, female, come and speak to one of my classes. I quoted this, and then she quoted her own, and it's a Joseph Smith statement where he says, "The saints can testify whether I am willing to lay down my life for my brethren. If it has been demonstrated that I have been willing to die for a Mormon, I am bold to declare before heaven that I am just as ready to die in defending the rights of a Presbyterian, a Baptist, or a good man of any denomination," and I think he would say women too. "For the same principles which would trample upon the rights of the Latter-day Saints, would trample upon the rights of the Roman Catholics, or of any other denomination who may be unpopular and too weak to defend themselves." In the last little while, I've recognized, and I have this desire to really help the marginalized, but it wasn't done intentionally. I think it was something that I saw my parents doing as I was a child. And this perhaps is one of those things we can talk about, is what we can do as adults to help the children and help other people, help others feel included. But I grew up in a home where I genuinely did not know when I got home who was going to be at the dinner table. I really didn't. It could have been a homeless person. It could have been somebody. My dad was a social worker. It could have been an unwed mother who was pregnant with an unborn child. It could have been a child. It could have been someone from a different race, a different sexual orientation. You just didn't know, and I already had 12 siblings. I mean, it was ridiculous. But I genuinely knew that my parents loved people. They were very strong in their faith as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but they were very inclusive and very accepting. One of the other things that I loved that my parents did is we talked with them. They weren't just simply invited, they were invited as a member of the family. In fact, sometimes there were times in my life where genuinely, and this is not the case for everyone and likely shouldn't be the case for everyone, but there were times in my life when I honestly didn't know how many siblings I had. Because they would bring in a cousin who would live with us for 3 years, or they would bring in somebody, there was just somebody, and people would say, "Can you name the names of your family members?" They go through it really quickly, and I honestly would just throw in names of people, because it was just another person at the table that was sitting with us, and it was genuine love that my parents showed them, regardless of their background, regardless of their struggles. In Boston, I loved serving as a chaplain in Boston, and frankly, when I was asked to serve as a chaplain in Boston, it was a funny experience, because I had asked previously if I could ever leave Utah as a seminary teacher. I actually didn't know I could be a seminary teacher. In fact, the first time I asked, I was told that I couldn't teach religion because women couldn't teach religion for the church. And so I kind of let it go, was called to serve a mission, served my mission. It's so exciting we have LA together. But when I came back from my mission, I went over to BYU, and there was the big inscription on the Joseph Smith building where it says, "Teach ye diligently, and my grace shall attend you." And the Spirit just pounded me. I just knew that I wanted to teach diligently, but I was feeling, and I thought, and I had been told that I couldn't teach. And it was this paradox in my life. But I walked up to the teaching office, and I just said, "I recognize that women are not allowed to teach full time for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I would just like to teach in some format." To which my misunderstanding was corrected, and I was put on the path to being a full-time religion teacher. However, as I started teaching a profession that I have always loved, I did ask a number of times if it was possible to leave Utah, and those who were closest to me said, "No, we don't leave Utah because you don't hold a priesthood. And in order to have an assignment outside of Utah, there has to be a priesthood holder that you can be under," which was fine. The intentions were completely pure, but as I transferred and came to BYU to be a full-time religion professor, I was asked by the head of the church educational assistant at the time to leave my profession at BYU and return to the seminaries and institutes and be the seminary and institute coordinator, and to be over the Harvard, MIT, and all of those universities in that area. And my response was, "I don't think I can. And he laughed at me. He said, "Why can't you?" And I said, "Because I'm a woman and I don't hold the priesthood." And he laughed again and said, "Well, we're asking you to go. And in addition, we'd like you to serve as a chaplain at Harvard and MIT." My mind was blown because up to that point, I had asked and was always told no, but in this case, I'm getting a phone call asking me to go. So I did go. Many wonderful experiences there, which I will likely share a little bit. But one of those many wonderful places in the Boston area is the Holocaust Museum, where you kind of walk through it. It's more of a display and exhibit. But at the end, again, another quote that we're very familiar with, many people, is this quote that is the end of that display. It says, "They came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. And they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. And then they came for me, and by that time, no one was left to speak up." I love this statement, and I love it also in terms of the people that it represents. One of the things that I strongly encourage is, and I think this is across the board, is get to know people. Just get to know them. Take responsibility for people. When my husband and I, we were both married when we were 40, and we were not able to have children for some obvious reasons, but partially just because of age, but other issues that were going on. And we tried and tried and tried. One day we received a phone call from a lady we did not know, completely out of the blue. We're not trying to adopt. We were actually going through a number of failed IVF cycles, trying to have these children. And this woman just said simply, "I have been following you and your husband on Facebook, and I believe that you are supposed to be the parents of my 2 daughters. I'm at the courthouse, and I'm older, and I have no way of taking care of them. I have no money, and I need your help. Will you adopt our daughters, my granddaughters?" I was completely shocked, blown out of the water. I had just finished writing this book, and I was doing an audio of the book that I had written about women in the priesthood. And I said to this lady, "I'd like to know more, but let me call my husband." I called my husband, and his response was, "Who is this woman, and what does she want?" Like, he just turned into this, like, what? How is this even possible that there are these 2 girls that we have been trying to have a family, and out of the blue, they come into our family? We did invite them into our family. We met them, and for the first little while, although there was a great relationship between us, my husband especially felt like he was a babysitter, and it was very, very hard for him. However, one day, we had an incident in which some individuals tried to take our girls and put them in a truck and drive off. And at that moment, Dustin turned from babysitter to, "You better take your hands off of my girls." And it was the most beautiful moment. I've never seen him so mad in my life. and it was a fantastic mad. And I recognize that one of the things that we need to do as we are trying to understand people and cultures and genders and every orientation, everything like unto it, is we need to love people, and we need to care for people as if they were our own. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we often teach about people being our brothers and sisters. That is something that I have learned in many, many, many faiths and many different backgrounds. I remember one instance where I was driving to my job in Logan, and I was doing my master's degree at BYU, so I was driving back and forth almost daily. It was a little bit ridiculous. And as I was driving one morning, I was teaching an early class, and my car broke down on the way, and I couldn't get any help. My cell phone was dead. I didn't have the cord. It was all those silly things that I should have prepared for, but I hadn't. As my car broke down, I just sat and waited. It was snowing outside. It was in the middle of the winter, and this other car pulled up. It was this little Hispanic man, so kind. And he just said, "Do you need help with anything?" I explained the situation. I didn't think he could really help. I went into the bathroom. It was warmer in there, and I didn't realize. He asked me if I could open the hood. I did, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, I came back, and the car was working. I had no idea how. And he just said, "Thank you so much. I'm happy to be of service." And I drove off, and I looked back, and I recognized he still wasn't driving, and his car was still there. When I got to the seminary building in Logan, Utah, I opened up the hood, and I recognized that he had switched out his battery with mine. He had driven a similar car, and rather than making a stink, rather than saying anything, I walked in quickly. He changed it, had it all ready to go by the time I was out, said nothing, and just sent me on my way. I was so grateful for that wonderful man who was able to put me and my needs above his own, even though it put him in a very difficult situation, I'm sure. There's a book that we talk about often, and it was on my mind this morning, and it's just The Little Red Hen. And it's about bread, and my daughters love this book for whatever reason. I can't get them to help me, but they love the book anyway. It doesn't seem that the application is lacking still, but the story's great. But I think about this book, and sometimes in terms of what we're talking about here, and if I were to put it in the little red hen's mouth, it would be, who will leave your table and sit with those not like you? Or who will step stop telling jokes that in any way minimize another individual, who will spend time getting to know and understand others that are not like you, who will ask the hard questions, who will recognize they have much to learn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully the answer is not I. So on the positive side, asking, Lord, is it I? Who will wash the feet of the Savior? And who will be those who will allow the Savior to wash their feet? It goes both ways, giving and taking. So from President Faust, he was a member of the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and an attorney. He said the following: "Let us not become so intense in our zeal to do good by winning arguments or by our pure intention in disputing doctrine, that we go beyond good sense and manners, thereby promoting contention or say and do imprudent things, invoke cynicism or ridicule with some flippancy. In this manner, our good motives become so misdirected that we lose friends, and even more serious, we come under the influence of the devil. I recently heard in a special place, your criticism may be worse than the conduct you are trying to correct." In my life, I've been grateful for the incredible examples of people who are willing to get out of their comfort zone in order to be a benefit to those friends, family, community members, and even the larger population. Many stories, of course, that I can share, that we can both share, and just a simple plea, as Ben has said as well, to reach out, to ask the questions, and to help other people feel included.
Thank you so much to both of you for your insights. Before we open the floor for questions, I'd like to ask that we, number one, thoughtfully and sensitively frame our questions. And number two, that they be questions. We're here primarily to hear Ben's and Barbara's thoughts, experiences, and feelings on the topic. We're kind of here to pick their brains and hearts. That sounds very morbid. We're here to do that in a non-morbid way, but we're here to listen to them and to learn from them. If you have a comment or commentary, please save it for after this session and catch either one of the panelists or a member of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies team or a fellow attendee, and share your comment with them. But now is the time reserved for questions. And we have until about, let's see, what time is it? We have about 20 minutes, so until about 1:15 the hour, and then we'll wrap things up. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and one of our students will, with alacrity, bring you a microphone so that we can catch you on the recording and you can be heard. But maybe I can begin first with a question really quickly for Ben. And Ben, you don't have to answer it quickly, but I will ask it quickly. I can surmise the answer to this, but I don't want to surmise. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what do you see as reasons for LGBTQ individuals stepping away from religion?
Yeah, I've talked to many hundreds, maybe even thousands of LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, and I would say almost all of them start out wanting to continue participating in the church, and then most of them end up no longer participating. And I think there are big reasons for that. Sometimes it's a lack of doctrinal fit, people feeling like they just don't fit into the teachings of the church. But more often than not, I talk to people who just feel like they won't be welcomed. Just this last weekend, I was in Denver to speak, and I met this woman who, she's out to her family, she's in her 30s, and she identifies as gay, and she wanted to come out to her ward, but she's like, will they reject me? Will they accept me? And she said, I just can't deal with any more rejection, because her family hadn't been good to her. So she just stopped attending. And I said, well, do you wish you could go back? And she said, of course I would. And I said, well, why don't you just come out to them? And she said, I just can't. I just don't have the energy for any rejection right now. So I think one of the things that keeps people, LGBTQ members, from attending is just feeling like they're not going to be heard, they're not going to be understood, and they're going to have to be put on the defensive. And we just really want to be loved.
Thanks for that insight.
Can I add just one quick thing?
Yeah,
Sorry.
please do.
So one of my good friends, his name is Charlie. We do this podcast together called Questions from the Closet. Charlie recently announced that he's going to marry his boyfriend. And that's going to cause a lot of things to happen for him, and he might lose his church membership. And he has said repeatedly and explicitly, I want to go to church. I want to keep worshiping. I know that this is going to put barriers between me and my church participation, but I want to be there. I want to sing the hymns. I want to talk about the gospel. I want to worship my Savior, and I want to do that there. And he is someone that I think is remarkable, because he says, no matter what people are going to say, I'm going to be there, because this isn't about me and that person. It's about me and Jesus. And I think that's a position that most people haven't gotten to yet, because attending church can just be so hard when you feel so misunderstood.
Thank you again. And we can have some follow-up questions related to that as well. Let's go ahead and field, I think I see a couple of hands, a few hands.
Thank you very much, Ben. I recently purchased Scott Sorensen's book. I have a grandson, age 17, family of 8. His father's the bishop of his ward. He stepped away from the church. His father and family and extended family are very supportive and loving of him. I sent him a text telling I have this book in order to better understand and support him. If he wants the book, I'll send it to him. He thanked me for loving him. This is a commentary. I'll turn it around, make it a question. But I think you probably answered it. The question is, how can I better support my grandson?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do you mean Skylar Sorensen?
Scott Sorensen?
Do you mean Skylar Sorensen? I know.
Skylar.
Yeah.
Skylar Sorensen. Yeah, right.
Sorry, I'm not trying to say that I know everything about the LGBTQIA space, but I do.
Yes. And Ty Mansfield is his friend, and Ty Mansfield's wife dated my son before she married Ty.
So, what fun connections. So when I was writing my book, I end up in a place that I think most Latter-day Saints would want a gay person to end up. I actively participate in church. I work at BYU. I keep church standards. I'm a believer. So I think I end up in a place where a lot of people would want their LGBTQ loved ones to end up. And my biggest fear in writing my book was that people would read it and then think, oh, my gay loved one can be just like Ben. Like Ben's got it figured out. So with that in mind, I wrote this on the second to last page of my book. I wrote, I have one parting request. If you were tempted to give this book to an LGBTQ friend or loved one, I would ask you to resist that temptation and pause for a moment. Instead of giving them my story, can you invite them to tell you theirs? Now, when my dad read that, he said, that's not a good way to sell books. And I said, I'm not trying to sell books, I'm trying to teach people. I can't remember who said it, but there's this famous quote where someone said, being heard and feeling loved feel so similar that most people can't tell the difference. So I would say the best way to support any LGBTQ person in your life is just to help them feel heard. Now, people go through different phases in their understanding of their orientation, and people might get to a really angry phase, which is really common. And so in those moments, we just need to hold that pain with them, hold those difficult feelings with them. So I would say, you've come out to me, I would just love to hear your story. Is it okay if I ask you some questions? And most LGBTQ people, since we hid for so long, we are thrilled to be able to share our stories. So I would say, just ask your loved one, help me understand what it's been like for you. And then have that conversation again a month later, and then again 2 months later, and just keep asking questions as they come. And as people feel heard, that's how they're going to feel loved.
Yeah, I'm actually going to read a quote from Ben's book as well that I think goes along with this. I loved this. He said, when things at church have been hard or painful, it has never helped when someone tried to explain to me why I shouldn't be feeling pain. Invalidating hurt by giving doctrinal or other explanations does not ease another's pain. What has helped are sincere expressions of love, letting me know that I am loved and wanted and that I belong. I loved that.
Man, that's good. Yeah. Yeah, can I share one quick example? This actually happened 5 years ago at this very conference. I was still a student at BYU, and I was on a panel with Steve Sandberg, who's now the general counsel here at BYU. And in this Q&A setting, a very similar setting to this, someone asked a question that Steve knew would be hard for me and pretty triggering. It was more of a comment than a question. And while that person was answering that question, Steve just reached over and put his hand on my knee. And then he answered the question, so I didn't have to. And just knowing that he was saying, I've got you, I'm here with you, just meant so much to me. Now that's something we can do literally, but it's definitely something we have to do figuratively. Let people know, I've got you, I'm here with you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we have another microphone right here.
In what ways do you see things getting better and foresee things getting better for both of you?
I've been so intrigued with Ben, it's hard to even think that I'm up here with them. I love this experience. I do believe that there is a level of understanding and a desire to learn at a level that I have not seen before. As a religious educator, I remember listening to a presentation by President Eyring. At the time, I believe he was the Commissioner of Education, where he said that you need to do better. What your parents did 20 years ago will not be good enough. And that was 20 years ago. So now what our parents did 40 years ago will not be enough. And I believe that that is true. As a church, I believe that we have focused a lot on teaching law and doctrine, which is fantastic that we do. And we have this big perspective of plan of salvation and things, and I believe other religions have done that as well. But as I have listened to the training that we receive as religious educators, where we influence a number of students that come, of course, to Brigham Young University, and also in my experiences with family and friends, people are acknowledging that that we are all children of God, that all are alike unto God. And we are teaching and training on being more sensitive, and teaching and training and paying more attention, and inviting not people just to the dance, but we're bringing them to the dance and dancing with them. I'm seeing a big change in that. So if it's LGBTQ issues or women who may feel marginalized or demeaned in some way, or other cultures and things, I think we have come a long way. However, we have a long way to go. So I do believe that there has been some training. I believe that there has been some real teachings from even their prophets on being peacemakers and reaching out to people. We're seeing some good examples of that. But I do see sometimes we're inviting, we're still not dancing.
I love that. Thank you so much. And the way I've been saying it lately is things are better than they've ever been for LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, and they're still bad. But things are so much better. This is one thing I've noticed is that the work of teaching people about the realities of LGBTQ Latter-day Saints has kind of fallen to women. And I see a lot of women, especially a lot of moms of LGBTQ kiddos, sharing stories and trying to create spaces of love and belonging. And so, you know, some of the things that have changed. When I was an undergrad here at BYU, I graduated in 2008. I didn't know a single gay student on campus. I thought I was the only one. Like, I really thought I was the only one. And now we have hundreds of openly LGBTQ students. And so people who felt so lonely and isolated like I did, you know, back in 2008, there's a community now that didn't exist before. You know, before, when someone would come out, they'd be kicked out of their house. And that does still happen, but it happens a lot less than it used to happen. And so I'm really grateful that we're moving to a place of listening, understanding, and trying to include people no matter their choices. But one thing has been happening that I think has made things worse in about the last year and a half or so. The media has taken on LGBTQ people as a political thing, and they view us as discussion points for policy, and as a way to discuss fears for them and their children. And I feel too often that I'm viewed as an issue and not as a person. And so we need to do a much better job of when we're talking about LGBTQ people, talking about people and not about them as an issue. And one thing I've done to kind of shift the discussion is I don't say my sexual orientation anymore, because people talk about my orientation and they talk about it in such a sexualized way. Like, no, this isn't just about who I'm sexually attracted to. It's about who I'm oriented to, who I'm drawn to, both intellectually and romantically and even spiritually. So now I just say orientation because I'm tired of being sexualized. I'm tired about being asked about my sex life. And so I think we need to do a better job of talking about people and not using us as issues.
Can I just give an example of that in my own world as well? I'm going to go with the LGBTQ issues, but I'm also going to go with women's issues. I had a student that came to my office, and I was the first person he had told, and this happens commonly, frankly. And he was shaking and so concerned, and he was, what Ben was describing, handsome young man, right home from his mission, tall, et cetera, right? And
is he cute? What's his number? I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. That was a joke.
I'll never tell. Anyway, he said to me, I wanted to come out to you because I felt that you would understand and not judge. However, I've been very concerned because I was afraid to come out to you because I know what people say you will do. That's quite a dichotomy, and that's quite a paradox. His heart told him that he was safe with me, but his mind and what he read and what media, and this is not in any way throwing under the bus on media either, but what he was told his experience was going to be was very different than what his heart was going to be. I am so happy that this young man and many others have come to my office, come to my home, been with my family in circumstances where they recognized by the person and rather than what society and culture is telling them. I think that is one of the most destructive things we can do is paint a picture of falsehood for people who are struggling. We need to open up doors, open up windows for people who have somebody to talk to, not be closing them and put fear for anyone, whether it's LGBTQ, et cetera, or females. I remember I've had on many occasions just on the women's issues and being told you can't ask that question. If you ask that question, you're gonna get in trouble. Or if you ask that question about women in the priesthood, or if you ask that question about authority, temple, relationships, preside, why terminology is used in different ways, then you're going to be X, or you're gonna have a red market, et cetera, et cetera. And for the most part, it is the exact opposite of the experience that I've had. But so much is based on fear, and so many people are being told to hide or to not move forward and not progress because of a fear factor. But instead, if we could magnify people and give them opportunities and say, yes, I actually believe you could go talk to that person, you could probably get some help. Well, some of the things that have opened my eyes is when I've had serious questions about the church and I've talked to people at the highest levels of the church and found out they had those questions too. So rather than teaching fear and rather than saying this is what's going to happen to you, let's teach, let's trust people, let's try to reach out. And that's not to say that sometimes it doesn't happen. I want to be clear that sometimes people are not the kindest and sometimes the responses are not there. But let's be careful to use fear to keep people from doing what they need to be doing and getting the help they need to be getting.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm going to just ask a question, follow up. You mentioned women's issues, and I wanted to ask what advice you might have for a woman who feels marginalized either in her local congregation or in the church in general. I mean, those of us who may have watched General Conference this last conference, there were 2 women speakers and many people commented on that, and yet women are told to bring their voices, but may feel like they don't necessarily have the opportunity. So what advice do you give women, either at the local level or speaking more generally?
Unlike Ben, I don't always have the best answers. So I would say a few things. One, to listen carefully because often their feelings are very valid. Especially when we live in a culture where having people on the stand is a show of validation and it's a way to give people a voice. And women often do feel like women are not going to be in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints likely the prophet, right? Women are likely not going to be holding the keys of presiding priesthood authority. And we recognize that very few men will as well, but to recognize that there is a real hurt for some people, and there is a real struggle that they feel like they're, especially among the more educated women. We often talk about studies that show that the more education you get, the more likely you are to stay active in the church, and that is not true for women. It is not true that the more educated a woman gets, the more likely she is to stay active. We have to be very careful with some of these assumptions that we have. If women are used to being validated or putting in levels of leadership outside of the church in their own professions and even their own educational pursuits, it's difficult then to go to church and feel like you can never have a voice, you can never be validated. So I think number one is to make sure that we validate and we understand that some women, many women, in those cases especially if they're vocalizing it, are being honest with their feelings. So rather than just saying, don't worry about it, the church is true, God bless America, and you're going to go to the celestial kingdom, that's not helpful for those who are suffering. On the other side, I would say that we have a strong need, perhaps as members of the Church of Jesus Christ, but also throughout the world. And I want to make the point, though, that this is also just not a Latter-day Saint issue. Sometimes we make it a Latter-day Saint issue. I loved being in Boston, especially with many women who were serving as chaplains from a variety of other religious backgrounds. And regardless of whether or not they received priesthood authority or they were given leadership positions, most women, regardless of their religious affiliation, felt demeaned in some way. It's not just a Latter-day Saint problem, I would say. But I think it's also important to recognize that culture has a very strong influence on this world. And I mean that in this, and this may be the not popular thing to say. But what do we see as success for a woman? What do we see as women fulfilling her responsibilities and fulfilling the measure of her creation? Is it to become the prophet? Is it to be the bishop? Is it to hold keys and have leadership positions within a hierarchical form of a church? Or is it to influence? And is it to change lives? And is it to help society be moral? And is it, like Ben is saying, to foster relationships with those who may be marginalized? What role, what responsibilities, what innate pieces of humankind, but especially with women, are being marginalized in society in such a way that if women do not receive the bureaucratic levels of leadership, that somehow they're demeaned? Or is it possible that women, in becoming women and understanding the role of women, actually increases their validity and it increases their value to society? So where the world would want us to put women in a high leadership positions, and I'm not saying that that's not important because obviously that's validation, but could we also focus on what women do well? I may and likely will, and this is so theocratic and this is so the Church of Jesus Christ, so bear with me when I say this. I will likely never be the prophet, and my children and my daughters will never be the prophet, but my goal for them is not to be the prophet. My goal for them is to become like Christ and to become divine. And I will want to do and help women understand that their most important measure of their creation is who they are as women, as mothers, as sisters, as aunts, as teachers, as religious leaders in the community and everywhere else. Not going to minimize what sometimes happens in the church, but I do believe that culture and tradition really does minimize the effect and the power and the influence women could have because of the strong comparison that is in their face constantly.
Wow, Barb, that was amazing. I just want to add one quick story to that. So there's a new history of the church that came out recently, and it's called Saints. And in volume 1, they tell a lot more stories of women. And about the second to last page, they follow the story of Louisa Pratt, and her husband Addison has been called on a mission. This is the time when the church is being persecuted in Illinois, and they decide to move west. And her husband's far off on a mission, and she has to go west by herself. And so she's complaining to a friend of hers that church leaders called her husband on a mission, and then they're not helping her to move west. So she's complained to her friend, and her friend says this. She says, "Sister Pratt, they expect you to go on your own and to help others along the way." And then Sister Pratt says, "Well then, I will show them what I can do." Now, I could give you a long list of things that I've done inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that have been so beautiful and impactful and wonderful. I could give you an equally long list of things I've done because of my belief in Christ outside of the church, because I felt called by God to do that. And so if someone's feeling like they don't have a place, see what God is calling you to do, and there's so much we can do. And really, I can give you such a long list, and some of the most important things I've done in my life are things I felt called by God to do that I wasn't asked to do by a church leader, but that God asked me to do. And I love that God can work in so many different ways. So let's show them what we can do.
And I'm going to add to that. Thank you, dear Ben. So because I don't want to skirt the question of church, but I want to be maybe too almost defensive. I'm not trying to be defensive here. How many women in the world without some type of religious formation have the opportunity to speak as a young child to a number of primary students, and then by the age of 12 genuinely speak to large groups of people in a congregation and have that training? How many women at the age of now 19, in my case 21, have the opportunity to leave their homes and speak at a visitor center and learn another language and travel throughout the world, bringing people to what they believe is the church? I mean, that was an opportunity that was given to me at a young age. And again, I'm not trying to minimize, but how many people at the age of 23 are given the opportunities to speak and teach in a religious setting and be trusted and speak at the Marriott Center in front of thousands of people? And then be called, and it's not even called, but assigned to go to Boston and be a chaplain serving at Ivy League universities. I mean, yes, I understand, and I know that I am one, and there are many people who don't, but these opportunities have come to me because of my affiliation with the church, not because, not the opposite. It's because of my affiliation that I have had these opportunities. I've had opportunities to travel all over the world. I've had opportunities to be in Argentina and build up people of a variety of faiths there, and Switzerland recently, and in New York, I've had these opportunities, and most of the opportunities I've had to be a leader in the world has come because of my affiliation as a woman in the church. Again, I do not mean to minimize anyone who is struggling with that, because I do know that it is real. I have many friends in that situation, but at the same time, we are given so much as well because of our affiliation that does not exist in any other way except through this organization.
Thank you. I'm going to take liberties, and we're going to extend to one more question. And then we've got the question already. Okay.
Hi.
There's two microphones, so we're going to wrap things up really quickly. We'll do a 1-minute response to each of these questions. Does that sound good?
We got it.
Okay. Yes.
Who first?
Up top, you.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you. Both inspirational. I literally had my tissues out. There's 2 quick questions for Ben. One, how tall are you? But second, question as a gay outsider to the church, your tales of personal kindness are inspirational, but these are not doctrinal recognitions. How do you negotiate the church's firm doctrinal disapproval of you if you, for example, have a partner and a romantic relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm 6'3" without shoes, but I have shoes with heels today, so I'm a little taller. And how do I reconcile like the doctrine and who I am? Like, that's a much longer than a minute question. But I'll just give you this basic answer. I have a firm testimony rooted in Jesus Christ and in the restoration of his gospel in these latter days. And I have a lot of questions, a lot of things that don't make sense, and I try not to worry about that. I have 2 overarching life goals. I want to develop Christ-like attributes and become like him, and I want to build the kingdom of God. And this is where I feel called to do that. So there are doctrinal things that don't make sense to me, but I am going to live my best life within the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because that's where I feel called to be. I know that answer is unsatisfying, but it's the best answer I can give you in a minute.
And again, Jonathan, I would plug this book. Ben just does an excellent job of kind of explaining that in a specific chapter in his book. Final question, right?
This goes along with it, actually just what you said. I teach religious freedom at BYU, Idaho, and on Monday they read an article. I'm walking around and I hear a young man say, why, if you are gay or lesbian and want to be in that type of marriage, why does the church not allow that? He loves God's children and everybody should love who they want, why is that not allowed? And I didn't have time to address that. I need some help.
Yeah, when it comes to why the church has certain teachings and why our doctrine is the way it is, I have been told very, very clearly a number of reasons why the church does not allow same-sex marriage, and I have spent decades thinking about this and pondering about it. And honestly, for me, none of those things make logical sense. And so if I were going to explain, well, it's because of this or this or this, for me personally, none of it's ever really resonated. But what has resonated with me is saying, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to move forward with my life? And seeing where I feel called to be. Now, I used to talk about staying in the church. I've stopped using that verbiage. Now I say I'm going to move forward in the church and live my best life in the church. So if there's someone who's like, I don't understand why the church's stance is this, I would say, I don't know either. But what are you feeling called to do? As you pray, as you talk to God, as you counsel with him, what are you feeling called to do? And I know a lot of people who say, it doesn't make sense to me, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to move forward within the church. And others who say, this doesn't fit, this isn't where I'm going to be, and that's not where I have landed. So I would say I would not worry about the logical explanations. I would point people to God and have them seek inspiration and guidance from him.
Did you want to?
Just a quickie. Thank you so much, Ben. My younger daughter Jane, she's a thinker, and she wants to know everything. She's 7, and recently we were driving home from a piano lesson, and she had all this food in the back seat and candy and things, and she said to me, I've used this before. She said, "Mom, if you didn't love me as much as you do, would you let me eat all this candy?" And it was a very insightful comment. If you didn't love me as much as you do, would you let me eat this? Insinuating that if I really didn't love her, she could do anything she wanted. Jane and Allie obviously came to us at an age where they were abandoned. I mean, gone. Parents just walked off and were raised in a van in a Walmart and had no food and no money. And they're in a position now where they have a mom that is probably a little bit too rigid at times with them. But because I love them. That's not the answer for every question, but I know that Jane at the age of 7 does not understand why I do some of the things that I do. And I don't understand why God does some of the things that he does, and Ben is explaining that he doesn't understand everything for him either. But I do trust in a God that does know. And I do trust that at some point my daughters will recognize that I loved them so much that I don't let them eat all the candy they want, even though that is desperately what they think is best for them at times. I don't have all the answers either, but I do know that God's laws and God's love really do connect. But it's not just a 10 on law and a 1 on love. It is eternal of both. A higher way of thinking that, frankly, I think myself and many others simply can't understand, and so we do have to trust, which is very hard to have faith in this day. But we can also increase in our charity, and I think that is the answer to some of this, is increasing our charity.
And I know we're out of time, but just a personal assignment I'm going to give you is I would take some time studying 2 Nephi 25 through 33 and see what God has to teach about this topic. 2 Nephi 25 through 33. Yes, chapters 25 through 33. 2 Nephi.
Well, Barbara and Ben have given, I know, me a lot to ponder and to consider and to act on, and I'm sure it's been the same for you. Please join me in thanking them for sharing their insights and experiences.